As we're rapidly approaching the fall feast season, there's a subject that would be good to address, especially because I refer to it in part through one manner or another at every feast. And that is a matter that it's generally during that period of time, and generally even on the last great day, talk about how that there aren't the same number of people with us any longer. And that happens every year by year, so this subject will help to fit into that somewhat this year, as it's very much on my mind. So every year there are those who no longer are part of the fellowship of God's church, and that reality is an unpleasant one, obviously, to deal with. It manifests so many things in human life that, although very unpleasant to have to face, nevertheless a living reality, unpleasant for us in the church I'm talking about, but everyone has to confront that, and it can obviously involve very close friends, family, and so on and so forth, but it's a part of life, it's a part of the church, always has been, and it's been a lot during PKG, obviously, and the things that we've been going through, that God has been refining the church and getting us ready for what's coming to pass before too long from now. I was going to read news at the end of the day, but I'm not going to have time for sure. But this world is such a mess. Financially, it's incredible that it's even holding on. And Europe, France, Germany, the U.S., it's everywhere, just on the brink and causing a lot of difficulties and problems. And because of the conflicts militarily, because of Ukraine and Russia, that's even stirring up things even more. But I think of the meeting they just had with Modi, Putin, and Xi, and Kim Jong-un in China. Incredible things taking place right in front of us, and things are moving more and more in a certain direction. And if anybody, I think of this world and how that there are people who see a war coming and they talk about it, and it's in the news a lot, but it's just like before World War II, except that communication today is a lot more powerful, a lot stronger. People are connected a lot more in many ways. And so this seems to be a matter that there is more information in that sense, but still the same kind of attitudes that are there until it happens. Doesn't affect people's lives a whole lot. It's something people tend to put farther and farther away from them, but it's on the horizon, and it's coming faster, and mainly because these things work together. Horrible finances in the world, people see that it's coming to a point where it's going to have to be dealt with, and an inability to do so, and with the kinds of relationships between nations, that just stirs it up, that there's going to be someone eventually that pushes it all away. They're already pushing it in Europe, and sometimes you wonder the motivations behind some of this, because some people throughout history, it comes to a point of war. The only way to solve their problem is a reset. Incredible. Today's sermon is entitled, Persevere to the End. Persevere to the End. This is part one. This title reflects the need to have strong conviction in order to persevere in God's way of life, in His truth, in His one true church until the end. And it's either there or it isn't. And only each one of us ourselves can answer such questions, can look at such things objectively, and know what's inside here, what each one of us believes, and what each one of us desires above everything else. And the end of all that, it should be that it's in our mind. It's until it's over with. That may be death, whatever it is. But it has to be a conviction that this is your life always. It is what it is. Anything less than that, it's just not there. And so people get tried in these things, and they're being tried now, and if it goes on another year, which I have my doubts, we'll see what takes place, but I'll tell you what, I feel it's that close. Things are happening that fast and getting that close, and there are some other things that have potential out there to fulfilling various prophecy and so forth. But I'll tell you, this is not a time to play games. It's not a time to drift. It's not a time to become lethargic. Laodicean in spirit, letting down in any fashion or form, and yet that is a thing that takes place in people's lives far too often. So it's a matter of each one of us' commitment, each one of us' desire, how much we want God, want this way of life, and if indeed the covenant we made with God at baptism is real, or maybe we didn't see it for what it was, for what we said, because we made a covenant with God at baptism. I am yours. That's what we told God. I am yours. And either that's true in our mind to this day from whenever we were baptized, or it isn't. And again, each individual has to address those things themselves. And some of this is being given because there's still the tendency, if we're not careful, to let down. You can afford to let down. Let's turn over to Matthew 22. So many who have been among us and before us have not had that kind of conviction to persevere to the end. Or at some point along the way, they lost it. God's church has been growing in great knowledge concerning the subject over the last several years. God's been giving us more, and I believe there's a lot of training in it and a purpose why we're going through this in a way that hasn't been addressed. It wasn't addressed hardly at all in Laodicea. Addressed at times in Philadelphia and had to be, but there was a lot that went by the wayside even there. But because there's been such a focus and God has revealed so much to us, there has to be something in this that has to do with our training that's unique to us. God works with different eras, different periods of time, different situations. It's a part of the construction of the temple and where we fit in. And to me, that's exciting, especially if we see a glimpse of that, of what it's about and what our part is going to be more so than what we perhaps have understood in times past in various places within the temple. Verse 22, or chapter 22, verse 1 in Matthew. Then Joshua answered and spoke to them again by parables and said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who arranged a marriage for his son and sent out his servants to call those who were invited," called, that's what the word is about, "to the wedding, and they were not willing to come." When we know what this is about, it's rather mind-boggling because it's about God, it's about his son, that's what it's about, and it's about the marriage, because it's likened to a marriage of everyone who comes into the church, who becomes a part of God's family and enters into that covenant relationship. There is that unique relationship whereby we can grow and mature and become stronger, and it begins with a calling, being drawn. And yet there are things that happen along the way once that process begins. And the vast majority have all gone by the wayside through time over the past 2,000 years. That's an awesome thing to understand, that of all who have been called, very few have been chosen over a period of 2,000 years. So this parable is very powerful in that respect because it applies to the church. This wasn't just, we understand that anyway. I think of this word translated as invited has a more accurate meaning associated with one's own will, unique. It has to do with one's will, being invited, being called, but it has a response here. And in something to become resolved or determined that leads to one's truer intentions. So this is what all this brings out, this process of this invitation and what all is involved in it. It depends upon us what we want. The invitation is there, God has offered it to us, but what is our response and what is inside of us, inside of our being? So it does boil down to one's own true choice in life. That's really quite revealing. Verse 1 again. Then Joshua answered and spoke to them again by parables and said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who arranged a marriage for his son and sent out his servants to call those who were invited, those who were called to the wedding, and they were not willing to come." So it's at a point somewhere along the line. Now, we think of all those who've been called in different eras and times past. Well, that process has already gone by because the invitation was there. How they responded to it has been up to all of them at different times. The majority have turned it down, made excuses of one excuse or another in human life that they have departed from and turned away from what God was offering to them. And so in that respect, that's already determined for them. But it's not for those who are still alive at this point in time, obviously. It's still ongoing. Because the reality is that when people die, as people have over the past many eras of the church in the past 2,000 years, that judgment's already set. There are those who are going to be a part of God's family, who responded properly, who are going to be a part of the wedding, and those who are not. So it's unique in how we understand and how we see what God has given to us in these things. Verse 4. Again, he sent out other servants. So there were those who weren't willing to come, sent out other servants, saying, tell those who are invited, look, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and fatted cattle are killed, and all things are ready. Now again, for those in times, eras past, it was all set before them. This is what you have. The things they heard, Sabbath by Sabbath, holy day to holy day. They had to make judgment in those things as to what they were going to do. And then various things would happen in their life, and there would be various sermons given then in their lives that they would hear that would be a warning about this very thing, how they responded. Were they responding properly? Were they ready? Because we're supposed to be ready. And we're always supposed to be on guard. That's a message that goes through all the eras. We're always to be ready. We're always to be on guard. We're to be prepared, because that accident that happened just in front of us on the freeway today can happen to anyone. Your life can be over with just like that. And you better be ready, because that time is over. And if you're not, you know what? It's the resurrection after the 1,000 years. That's what it is, because the job couldn't be completed in you if God allowed such a thing. Because I know that God protects us from those things over and over again. But if we're not ready, not on guard, not doing our part, He can allow it too. So I have prepared my dinner, my oxen and fatted cattle are killed, and all things are ready. So as far as God is concerned, as soon as He offers this way of life, it's just a matter of choices on our part, isn't it? Incredible. As far as God's concerned, the way is clear. Everything is there you need to grow, to conquer, to overcome, and many have over the past 2,000 years. But many more have not. That's a stark reality. Verse 5, but they made light of it and went their ways. You think, that's insane, isn't it? When you think about God, when you think about God's way of life, made light of it. I have seen so many people come to that point spiritually in their lives where they begin to make light of what God has put. They don't value it. That's making light of it. If it's not valued, if it's not grasped with all of our being, then spiritually that's what we can do. We can begin to make light of what God has given to us, especially by our actions and wrong choices. So it's not taken as seriously as it should be. This stuff just continues on. You think, human life, human nature, sad. Sometimes it's just flat pathetic. Choices that people make and place before God. Make light of it, as it says here. But they made light of it and went their ways. That's what happened when people begin to leave, when they begin to spiritually leave, even if they're still with us, they're leaving. When someone comes to a point where they're disfellowshipped, it didn't happen overnight. It's a longer process. It takes time to become weak and weakened and to begin making choices that aren't right and sound, to begin getting to a point where a person can't see things on a spiritual plane with the response that should be in the mind. In other words, to have the strength they need to fight because they've given up at some point and something else has become important or other things have become important. So by the fact that they begin to go their way and move away from the church, move away from the fellowship, move away from friendships, that's something that always boggles my mind too. True friends, Joshua said, if you obey me, if you keep my commandments, you are my friend. And that's what it boils down to in the church. We're either wanting God's way of life and holding to the truth. That's the only way we can even have friendships in the church that are true, that are genuine, that are right. It's because of God's Spirit and because of the strength we have, because of that fellowship we have. Should be a simple thing to see. And so I think of people who leave, I think of that song, we went to God's house side by side and counsel blended sweet. And I think of all the people that I've known, that we have known, hundreds and hundreds, and I believe into a few thousand, who've gone by the wayside. And the choices that were made, I think we ate together, we laughed together. I thought we were friends. What became more important than that friendship? What became more important than that friendship and that camaraderie and that fellowship we had? It all goes back to God, and that's the key. To understand it has to do with God and God's way of life. Because we have fellowship because of God. That's what makes our fellowship unique. And so those choices that are made, it's like all that time invested. Well, you invested it, if you invested it, and you're blessed mightily for it. But someone else, if they turn away from that, they're going to suffer. They're going to suffer for it. If they choose suffering, so be it. But they made light of it and went their ways, one to his own farm, another to his business. Sometimes it has to do with things like that. It's like a choice between God, obedience, and giving to God what is God's, or holding on to it, or what becomes more important, and maybe something becoming much more important in a pursuit in life, whatever that might be, that God and God's way of life and God's church begins to take a back seat. It's not first anymore because God is first. And God's church fits into that. I think of different ones, and I think of one in particular who basically had a bit of a problem with that. It was like, no, family comes first. No, God comes first. God, this was a stumbling block for him. It's God's church comes first then. If we understand that, God's church comes first in our lives because that has to do with God. We're here because of God. We have a fellowship with God and one another because of God. And so if we get this idea that something else is more important, notice I didn't bring my clock. I hear this. You think, horrible, horrible decisions, the order of understanding certain things, because if God isn't the family, if God isn't first, if God's church isn't where the family is focused, because we share that Sabbath by Sabbath, it's about family getting together. And where we have ability then to have fellowship, it's about that relationship that we have, that fellowship we have, all by God, because of God. And that's first in our life. We're not going to miss out on Sabbath services. We're not going to miss out on watching and learning what we need to learn. And where we have opportunity for fellowship, we take hold of that. Awesome that we have that opportunity. To turn away from that shows the priorities aren't right. Or to think something else is more important. Not even family is more important. I hope you understand what I said. Because it's about God. It's about God's church. And if that's our focus, then and only then does family have real meaning. Truly. Without that, what is family? It's without God. That's what it boils down to. God's missing in there somewhere. Verse 6, now others seized his servants. It's a word that literally means to have power over, took hold in order to have power over another. And so sometimes this can involve a lot of different kinds of things. It can have to do with how people begin to pursue their own objective, their own power or authority, different ones in the church who try to get a following or try to get people to follow them or try to turn people away from whatever a structure is given and so forth and that God has given. And so taking advantage of the servants. Now others seized his servants. Totally wrong mindset. Now we can see this in a physical way, but to see it spiritually, what God is giving to us, it's a little more difficult sometimes to grasp and comprehend what's taking place here. And treated them spitefully. Treated them spitefully. The word means to shame, to look down on, to treat insolently, as rude or disrespectful. So a lot of these things often, excuse me, man, times happen. Just what I need. I've got to stop for my little shot of throat cleanser. Don't look at the color of the bottle. I won't be on camera with this because it'll go all over the world if I do. Maybe. Oh, what a day. So anyway, it talks about treating them spitefully. So it's about how different ones are looked upon, perhaps within even the church, even within the ministry. Servants who are out there to serve, to help in the church. Others who themselves want to seize power, have control, and so forth, and look down upon others because they feel like, well, they're not qualified or they're not. This has happened so much. This has happened so much in PKG. I've seen it in the church from going back to Philadelphia through Laodicea and on. Attitudes that people sometimes have towards others in the ministry or elders or people who are serving. And the reality is, even if they're doing a bad job, even if they're doing some things that aren't right in their life, until they're put out of that place, to usurp, to look down upon, to treat improperly would be sin on your part. And I've seen it happen over and over and over again. Even today, I know that within God's church, there are people who still look down upon women, and certain women especially, who are ordained. And that makes my blood boil. Who give little account and credibility to the reality of how God works, because that has to do with authority and it has to do with how God's Spirit works. There's a way that God works in the church, and if you get in the way of that, you're making a big mistake. And some people do, and some people by their attitudes, and other people can see it then. If someone is treated improperly or spoken to improperly, and others are around, they see that. And you may be hurt and harmful to them by a wrong example, that's okay. No, it's not okay. Sometimes when I hear of some of these accounts and some of these things that take place and some things that are said, you can just be glad I wasn't standing there at the time. But know that God was there, Christ was there, and they know exactly what took place in those situations. And they don't go unanswered. You know, there are things that have happened in the Old Testament. I think of different stories right now, and you think, to do those things, they suffered sometimes, immensely so, for doing such things. Just like King David. When he had opportunity, he could have killed Saul several times, but he wouldn't do it, and I hope you understand why. Saul wasn't doing well. Saul did some things that were wrong, but he was God's king, ordained with authority and power at that particular time, and David wouldn't touch him because of that. It wasn't his right. He knew that God would do it if it's necessary, and when the time is right, and especially in the church, if we understand that, when the time is right, you know what? God will take care of it. Amazing if we just grasp some basic principles like that sometimes. I very much function that way. I know that God will take care of things. I know that in His time, if I need to address something, He'll give me what I need to address it. Otherwise, I don't need to worry about it until it's time. And then when it's time, God will bring it to the surface to be seen. And if it's not for me to deal with as far as the church is concerned, God takes care of it. Awesome. Power. I've seen this over and over again happen within the church. So we have to be so careful how we do things. You know why? Because God looks at each one of us, how we are responding to situations and circumstances and things when they happen, and that determines we're being judged. Judgment now is upon the house of God. It's been that way always. But once we're called, God's Spirit is there, leading, guiding, directing us. And we're being judged by our response, by how we react, how we think, how we live. What's horrible is sometimes I can say this about certain ones who speak out, especially towards some of the women who are ordained, and I realize they don't have the foggiest idea it's them. People hear things and they don't realize, no, it's you. But you have to have the spiritual ears to hear. And it's between you and God. And if you can't hear what God is saying, well, it's because you're getting weaker and you've allowed yourself to get in that state. And so we have to look at our own lives and think about things we have said or how we have acted or whatever it might be and judge ourselves, because that's what God says. We better judge ourselves or we will be judged. That means not in a good way. It has to do with condemnation, judgment. So others it says there, they seized the servants and treated them spitefully. That's because they look down upon them and start treating them in a way that shouldn't be treated, not respecting and so forth. That's just like the word means. Treat insolently or rude or disrespectful. There is no place for that in the church of God, but it's still here. And God's going to take care of it. We either repent or we don't. What if we only have about a year left? What if? How are we using it? How are we making it? What are we doing with the time? How are we living our lives? That may be all you have. Maybe even less. But anyway. So it goes on to say, and kill them. The word literally means to destroy or to cut off life with little concern. So it's not a matter of a literal physical killing someone. It's spiritual in your attitude of your mind, to where things can go so far sometimes that people can tear down or look down upon others to a point that they don't want to have anything to do with them. They cut them off. That's what it's about. They're not going to have any impact upon God's people. But this is the attitude of mind sometimes, because of the attitude that's there. As far as they're concerned, when people get to a point where they're gone or they leave, sometimes that's the way they look at the church or brethren in the church. Sometimes people turn downright hateful, horribly hateful. We've lived through a lot of that. Incredible. Why? Well, because there's a spirit world out there and it gets stirred up, and when they can get to that kind of a mind, it just amplifies it even more so, anyway. But when the king heard about it, he was furious. So he sent out his armies, destroyed those murderers, and burned up their city. It says a city, yes. But in relation to all who are joined together in their dwelling, their life of dwelling. That's what it's really about. And burn all, in other words, it's a final judgment. That's what it's about. God doesn't play games. He says, this is the way it is. I set before you this, and I hope you choose the right one. But it's up to us to make the choice and then to hold on to it with all of our being, to fight for it. And then if it doesn't happen that way, and people turn away, Sometimes we think about people who've turned away, and I would desire that they be able to repent and come back, maybe in the 100 years, if God gives that, and He allows those opportunities anyway. But so often when people's minds are set and they go off and do the things they do, it reveals things inside that sometimes we tend to think, because we made the choice we have, that others will surely want that. And the reality is, all of you are going to know people, and in families as well, who do not choose this way of life. You can't save them. You can't change them. It's not in your power to do so. And some of their minds, the people we have known in the past, their minds are already set. And though they're given an opportunity to repent, will not repent. I hope we're learning that within the church, because we tend to think and have thought in times past, everybody's going to be saved. No, they are not. And the numbers, when it's all said and done, may be a whole lot less than what people might think, because this is not owed to anyone. And God means what He says, and He offers us everything, and His sacrifice to give us everything. And if we don't want it and don't value it and don't cherish it, He will not give it to us. Truly. And so if you ever think and you get bogged down in your thinking about others, I think of those in my past. I'm going to speak about in some other sermons as well, but I've loved with all my being in that respect, who I have my doubts will ever receive this way of life. Though I wish they would make the choice, so it's in their power to do so. Everybody has to make their own choice between them and God. And no matter how much you might think of someone in a right way, in the sense of being positive toward them, that's not going to get them to make right choices in their life when they're given those opportunities. So what does that mean for us? We have to make choices that God is just and God is righteous and it's for a purpose. Even if I hope we can think that way. If it were you, if it were me, if I were of a certain mindset, that's what I would say, that's righteous. That I should not live. Wouldn't want to if it's going to hurt God's family. That wouldn't be right. And that's what God's going to ensure and make sure of, that doesn't happen. It's not going to be allowed in His family. Those who want His family really want it. They have chosen it, and they will fight, and they'll give their life to it if need be. That's what it's about. So you look at the Bible, you look at Joshua, you look at the disciples, what they did, a willingness to die for what they believed. They died some horrible deaths in the way they were killed. Horrible in the church, in the early church especially. So it's just a mindset. What do we believe? What do we hold to? How deep is our conviction of this way of life? To obey God, to love God. Verse 8. Then He said to His servants, the wedding is ready. Excuse me. But those who were invited were not worthy. Those who were invited were not worthy. Incredible. God calls a spade, and it comes a time when judgment is given that things have to be addressed for what they are. And we have to make choices and decisions according to what they are. I think of my family back in 1981. I think it was in 81. I may be wrong about the year. But coming together, we'd gone to the feast in different places. Had a call from my family, one family member, who told me they had just attended they wanted to share with us that they had just attended a feast site. They mentioned a place in the state, in the central part of the United States, and I thought, well, we didn't have a feast site there. But another organization did. They come to realize they went to a different feast site under someone who rebelled against God's government, against his own father, Herbert Armstrong. And they'd gone to Garner Ted's feast site. That's a choice, but it destroys things in a family. It destroys relationships. What do you do? Well, there's only one choice. So we're confronted with different things at different times in our lives as to what we're going to choose and why. And something like this, it's not an easy thing to address, but we all, if we've been around for a long time, have had to make these kinds of choices. What do we choose? What is it we want? What is it I want? What is my conviction? And what's going to get in the way of it? So he says again here, then he said to his servants, the wedding is ready, and those who were invited were not worthy. And so we've come to learn that within the church in a way I don't think we've ever grasped or understood to this degree before, that there are going to be so many who do not choose this way of life. And that which happens at the end of the 100 years is not a small thing. It's into the billions and billions of people who will not choose God's way of life when it's all said and done. And that's their choice. But they can't be a part of God's family and live forever in what God has designed the universe for trillions upon trillions upon trillions of years beyond that we can't comprehend as physical human beings yet. We can see it in part. And so we have to come to points like this when those who are closest to us, we have to make choices and decisions that are sometimes very unpleasant. But the choice had always better be God is first. And our life is with God, and that's first. God, Joshua, the church, his way of life, God's family, because it's within the church, it's going to become a part of that family into all time, forever and forever, is an awesome thing that God places before us. But each one of us has to make that choice ourselves, and we can't take anyone with us in that respect. No matter how much we might wish, desire someone would make right choices and choose this way of life, you can't give it to them. It's an individual choice. And that's a hard thing sometimes to come to see and come to understand and be at peace with and candidly come to love. Because it really shouldn't be any other way with God's love, with the sacrificing love that we should have in our minds. So it says here, verse 9, therefore go into the highways, and as many as you find, invite to the wedding. So those servants went out into the highways and gathered together all whom they found, both bad and good. So the wedding was filled. It says with guests, but the word's not even there. It was filled with those who were seated together to eat. More accurate in the context and what's being said. So incredible here. What God has given us to partake of, the desire we have, it comes down to each individual and what our choices are. Verse 11. But when the king came to see the guests, he saw a man there who didn't have a wedding garment. So he said to him, friend, how did you come in here without a wedding garment? So giving an example of how we're to be clothed on a spiritual plane, how we're to live on a spiritual plane, what's to be in our lives and our mind. And he was speechless. Again here, showing we must be growing. It's a part of our life, overcoming, persevering, not just attending. This has to be our life. It has to be our determination till it's over with. And the vast majority I've ever known in the church, gone by the wayside, made wrong choices, made different choices. I wish they hadn't. Loved them, but it's their choice. Verse 13. Then the king said to the servants, bind him hand and foot, take him away, cast him into outer darkness. In other words, there's no way of escaping God's judgment. We all have to decide and determine what we're going to live and whether we're going to fight for it, whether we're going to sacrifice for it, whether we're truly convicted of it. And so we go through a lifelong process of judgment, of seeing how we're going to live, the choices we make. Is God first? Over and over again, do we make those choices? Do we fight for this way of life? Do we seek to draw closer to God? Do we fast? Do we pray? Do we do the things that are necessary to be strong spiritually? Because we have to stay close to God on a spiritual plane in order for ourselves to be strong spiritually so that we can fight the things we need to fight, first of all in here, and then in the world around us. A dedication, a determination that only God can fuel and strengthen inside of us. But we have to make the choices, we have to want it, and we have to work for it, but asking God for the help to accomplish it because we can't do it on our own. So it has to be done on a spiritual plane. We know those things. And so he says here, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, and few are chosen. You think this has to do with all the way to the end? Or just when we are first called? Well, put it all together. Many are called, few are chosen. It's the way it's been. That's been the history of the church in that respect and what we've seen taking place. It has been throughout time. People have come and people have gone. They had to start dealing with that in the early church very early on. It didn't take very long. And Paul had to deal with it very quickly. He was astonished at what had happened. Different ones who took off in different directions. It's like, I can't imagine. The first time that ever happened, that had to be such a shock because of what's in their heart and their mind, of what they had dedicated themselves to, what they knew and understood. And especially like Paul, because of what happened to him, the experience he went through in being called, then he sees those who have had the same opportunity being called and drawn to the church, and then for them to start going in different directions and by the wayside. And then to see this, what people were doing, the choices that were being made very early on. Many are called and few are chosen. So do you think that has anything to do with the size of God's family? What's going to be there at the end? That many have been called, but few have come through it? Because I believe with all my being, that is so true and so powerful. It means what it says, and it's true because this has to do with the human life while you still have chance and opportunity to make those decisions, whether it's now or in the millennium. Just because a millennium is here doesn't mean everybody's going to choose God. They are not. Going to be a lot of liars, a lot of deceitful people who in here want something different, who desire something different and will do things that are different. We have to be convicted. It's our own conviction. This is what I have chosen. This is what I want. And this is it. I mean, that's what it is. Amazing. And only each one of us can do that, make that choice. So will the vast majority of human beings not be in God's family? I believe so. With all my being. The vast majority of people who have ever lived human life will not be in God's family. Everything has been sacrificed for everybody to make those choices, but only we can make those choices. And there is no other way than what God has done to grant that. I hope we understand that. I hope we agree with God in that, because it's for what is best and for what is right and righteous and just. There's a lot said there that can only be digested on a spiritual plane as to what God is doing in our lives and what's taking place in our life and what it is we want and what it is we desire, and realizing we may have been able to love others in the sense of the time that we had with different ones and the experiences that were there, but you can't save anyone. You can only work to save this self and your own relationship and your own thinking toward God, your dedication, your love for what God has placed before you, and then hold on to it and fight for it with all of your being. Nobody else can do it for you. So when it's all said and done, when the end of that 100 years takes place, do you think that's a small thing? It's into the billions of people who have not chosen God, and it will be their end. They're not intended to have to live any longer in torment of the human mind, because that mind is not at peace. That mind is in drama and has chosen drama and can never depart from it because that's what they've chosen over God. And we're either in agreement with that or we're not, because we have to make our choices. Many are called, few are chosen. I believe that number to be exceedingly high, just as it has been in the past 2,000 years. Do we want it for others? Absolutely. Had tears over it, hurt over it, but you can't make other people's decisions for them. You can't make anyone else's choice for them, no matter how much you love them, loved them. Got to love God more, His way of life more, and see why that's necessary that God has made such choices and judgments. Because it really can't be any other way. Into the future, into trillions and trillions and trillions of years. It has to be a single, strong family that rejoices in God, that rejoices in one another, that loves one another, that is sound. You have to fight for it, and it has to be what you want. Many are called, but few chosen. That means God's family, because everyone's going to have opportunity to be called. And there are going to be plenty of people that every one of us know, and in families, that haven't made those choices and will not make those choices. So is God's way just and right, filled with love, kindness, and mercy? Is God's way true and best? Absolutely. Any other thought in mind there? Got some horrible things to conquer and overcome. So would we like to see everyone make right choices? Yes. But they're not going to. People you have loved. Every one of us are going to have people we have loved now, who aren't going to make the right choices. That's on them. And it can only be on them. It's not on you. It's on them. And if they don't choose God, what do they have? What would that family have? See, either we agree with God and comprehend what God is offering and giving to mankind, that He's offering something so incredibly great, but if we don't agree with His one way of doing it, God knows the right way of life to live. And it can't have any selfishness in it. It can't have any bad will in it towards others. It can't have any drama in it. It's going to be filled with God's way that is one of love and care and concern for one another, without competition, without strife, without looking down upon others, without judging others, but receiving everyone into a great family and working together to accomplish things into the future that we can't even begin to comprehend right now. Awesome. Forever and forever. It's hard for us to even begin to grasp such things, but to me it's exciting and awesome. Beautiful. But it has to be of one mind, in agreement with God. And if people want to hold on to something different and won't let go of that, and they're right, well, they're wrong, and they won't be there. And that's going to be into the billions and billions of people. I hope you understand that. We need to understand that. And people we know and have known that have made and will make such decisions. You can't make it for them, no matter how much you would like them to make the right choice and decision. I can think of a lot of people right now I wish I desire them to make the right choices and decisions. But I know there are many of them, maybe even if not most of those I'm thinking about, who won't. That's their choice, not mine. But I rejoice in the family that God has, and that we all are going to be a single family, and the kind of love we can have within that family then because of God's Spirit, because of God's mind, because of God's being. Awesome. So far beyond that of human life and human thinking. Because we're so selfish by human nature, and when that is totally gone, what a marvel. No more lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life once we're changed. No more. I'm looking forward to not having any of that. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Because we have it up to here. Ever how tall you are, that's how much you have. A lot. And yet God's called us to begin coming out of that, to begin changing, to begin growing. And we have to make choices all along the way in that process. But He wants us to succeed. He gave His Son so that we could succeed. He let His Son suffer to death so we could succeed. And a lot of others through time who have suffered a lot to give us what we have. I think of the early disciples. All of them, perhaps one, was murdered, killed, put to death. All the disciples you read about in Scripture, except one that we believe, John, who was on the Isle of Patmos, was able to die an old life in his 90s. The rest of those that are written about died horrible deaths. Horrible deaths. They weren't nice. They weren't by the Romans especially, and what they did to them. It's what made Paul unique in his death, because he was a Roman citizen. He didn't have to die the excruciating way some of the others had to die, who were disciples, who were willing to give their life for what they believed and continued to teach what was right and what was proper in life. And there were those who received that, who themselves, many of them died early on. We have gone through nothing compared to what the early church went through, truly. The early church went through a lot. They suffered a lot, mightily so. We're too pampered, too weak today to go through much of that. We wouldn't last too long compared to them. There were some hardy people back then, truly. Thankfully, we don't have to, that we know of. There may be some tough things toward the end here, but we're in God's hands, and God will give us what we need when we need it. The mind is set, and we're set on God's way of life. I want to read this section here now, make sure I cover everything that I had to say here. Once called, once our minds are able to see the truth, one begins making a lifetime of choices. Is God first? And that's what we're tried in as we grow. And the more we make that choice, yes, 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 and we pass that test, and then there's something that takes place in the transformation of our minds and the way we think. And the easier it becomes to make those kinds of choices and decisions. God is first. For those who did not persevere in what God has given or revealed to them, then something else begins taking the place of God. And that happens over and over again, just like the parable we just read. It's the many. It's not the few. Many are called. Few, when it's all said and done, are chosen. In other words, there are few who truly make the right choices and decisions and truly hold on to what God has offered them, because that's what they want above everything else. And each individual only can make such a choice and decision. You can't take anyone with you into God's family. You can't do it. You can only work on this. You can desire and want things for others, but they have to make their own choices and their own decisions. And because of that, there are many who aren't with us to this day. That's the reason the apostasy took place, because many made the wrong choices and decisions in that. Truly. So again, some begin to make the wrong choices. Simple matter is God first, and those who do not persevere in what God has given or revealed to them, then something else begins to take the place of God, as I said, taking the place of the truth. taking the place of true and meaningful fellowship within God's people, amongst God's people. And when such a thing happens, it's hurtful to God's church. And yet, that's all I've ever known in the sense of friendships and fellowship in the church. People who leave, people who give up the battle, people who choose something different. It hasn't been the few, it's been the majority. When it's all said and done, even through the apostasy, choices, choices, choices. By then so many were so weak. I used to desire, felt like because of certain scriptures, what they said, that perhaps there would be those of 60,000 or more that would come along out of that which has been out there. I don't know. Maybe in time. Certainly they were given opportunity to make choices. It's all in God's hands, in God's timing, and in each individual, the choices they make. But God knows us how we are and how we think, and anyway. So again here, there are those things that begin to interfere in people's lives, and when such a thing happens, it's hurtful to God's church, to God's people. It often includes having to face that which is horrific and then learning how to deal with such matters. It often involves examining one's own place in God's church, our conviction, confidence. And we should be able to do that and look at ourselves. What is our conviction, my conviction? You can only look at yourself. Conviction, confidence, and true trust in God and His truth. And plan for us. In other words, His truth and His plan for us and all who will persevere. Because it takes perseverance, it really does. To live up to the name of Israel, it takes dedication. It takes that which is absolute commitment in your mind. This is what I have chosen. I don't care what comes along. This is my choice. There is nothing else. And we have to pray for strength to hold on to that conviction if we have it. It helps us to grow as we can then become stronger in conviction by the experience and choices we make. We can come to learn far more deeply, somewhat uncomfortable truth that concerns God's plan and judgment for all who will choose God. All will not want to do so. That's a horrible thing to have to address in life. I remember the first time I had to begin addressing it. All don't want God's church. It comes to a point where some choose something else. And if you're close to them and you've had close friendships and so forth, that always hurts. It's always hurt. We've seen so many things since I've been in the church since 1969, seen so many things of people you desired for people, and when they make certain choices and leave and give up what God has offered to them, it hurts. It's painful. But it shouldn't affect our choice. And yet, too often it does affect people's choices. And that's an area where sometimes people are judged. So, again, all will not choose what we have chosen. And we can't save them as we come to greater conviction of placing or seeking to keep God first in our lives. You come to learn that pretty early on, or we should, that you can't save anyone else. No matter how much you love someone, no matter how much you want to see them in God's family, in God's church, and eventually in God's kingdom, it's their choice. And if they make the wrong choice, that's upon them. And you can't change that. God tries. God gives so many opportunities and help to people in His kind of judgment and love that we don't even have, because we're growing in it, but we don't have it. And so God gives much more, has great, incredible patience. And so what remains is what will remain. And it'll be a great family, God's family, Elohim. You can't take anyone with you. You can't make them change. So Christ explained that such choices confront us, and we must have our own true conviction of God being first. And then you have to fight for that. You have to pray for that. You have to seek that. Truly. There can be no wavering, no compromise. I've seen so many make compromise, and it always leads to devastation when people compromise. No letting down on what we've chosen to live, no watering down of the truth. I've seen this happen over and over again, where people start watering down the truth, and that's the worst. That happened in Laodicea, horribly so. Truth watered down to the point where they were burning literature at headquarters, piles, bonfires. Bring it all out. Everything that Herbert Armstrong ever wrote, make sure it's in this fire. Mind-boggling what took place. Wanting to burn up the past, wanting to burn up any memory of him, of the process, of Philadelphia, of what had been organized, of what had been an incredible work. But something happened up here when people got to that point. Sick, perverted, somewhat demonic minds to turn that way. Let's turn over to Luke chapter 14. Because we have to press forward, we have to persevere, truly. That's what it's about, persevering. Perseverance. It's not easy. It's something you have to be committed to with all your being, because it affects all your decisions you make in life. Is God first? Are we doing it the way God says it should be done? Luke 14, verse 26. If anyone comes to me and does not, it has the word in the King James hate, but it's not hate. It's not the word for hate. It's to love less. In other words, it's love less by comparison. That's what the meaning of it is in this respect. So if anyone comes to me and does not love less their father and mother, in other words, we're to love God first. Because if we don't love God first and God's way of life first, we're going to start loving something else and placing it above God. And this is what happens to people when they begin to veer to the left hand or the right hand. In God's church, they begin to move away from the truth. To love less their father and mother, wife, and I don't know why it's not here, and husband, and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and their own life also, they cannot be my disciple. That means God has to be first in our convictions, God's way of life, God's truth. With all of our being, that we love that because we see what it produces. It gets rid of drama. It gets rid of the way we think as human beings, because what we're shown in Scripture is so true. Human beings are ruled by. Human beings don't rule their lives until they begin to come into the truth. And then for the first time, to truly begin to rule their lives according to a standard, the standard which comes from God, that's when the change begins to take place, and when He gives His help and His Spirit to accomplish that. Before that, what rules our life is lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. That's what Scripture shows us, and it's so true. Those things rule the lives of human beings. They're not in control of their lives, truly. Not with determining what is truly right and wrong, because if they don't even know it yet, they can't even make those choices until their minds are opened up to it, and God has to do that in His time. So in the past 6,000 years, He calls a few, and then as soon as Christ returns, establishes His government over this earth, very, very soon now, this world's going to be dumbfounded. When war finally erupts, when what we see in the newspaper, read on the line, or hear on TV anymore, that world war is getting closer and closer and closer. Today, I was going to go through and read some news articles, and it is dumbfounding how the world is thinking. They are moving closer to war. The things that just took place, Modi, India now, I didn't think India would ever go up there, but they have. Xi, whatever. You think Putin, Kim Jong-un, especially those three, there's something happening out there, very powerfully so. Plotting, preparing, wanting to see the overthrow of this nation, desiring to have this BRICS process grow, all the nations that belong to that and are adding to it. They want it to become strong because they believe that they have time on their side, and because of that, they can get more and more nations to turn against the U.S. and the U.S. process of the dollar being the primary dominant ruler in the world in that respect, and they're trying to change that. And so they're known by the BRICS, the abbreviation of those nations that are a part of it. And now India moving a little closer. Kind of surprised by that one. I don't know if that's going to remain there or what. Incredible. But you think that part of the world and what's taking place in the news and the rhetoric that's taking place, I'll tell you, some of the headlines they're scary. Because so much of the world is oblivious to what happened before the history that led up to World War II, and they're willingly oblivious right now to what's taking place. Do you know that Europe is actually, they're pressing toward a war by what they're doing? They know, I don't know how many of you realize some of the news that's out there right now about the economy of these different countries over there right now, what's taking place. France is in horrible, horrible, horrible shape financially. Germany and the things they're doing, and yet they've tried to raise up the amount that they're paying into NATO to meet what President Trump has said, because they want to keep that alliance there, because they're afraid of that big neighbor over there that keeps pushing at them through the Ukraine. And things are getting more intense, they really are. And yet this economy, this economic thing is getting worse and worse at the same time. You realize there are nations who have gone to war because of that very thing? When it gets to the point where they recognize that they're getting close to the brink, that they do stupid things, that they turn to wars, and this is just going to fuel a fire of what God says is coming anyway. World War III. Incredible. And the world as a whole is oblivious to it, and yet some are starting to take note of the way the world is moving. It's just a matter of time. And the kind of weapons that are there, it's scary. Should I not talk about it? Or should we just address the reality that's before us to know what's on the doorstep? Because it's there. We're so close. It's going to be a horrific thing. And only then will people begin to be awakened. So God tells us, persevere. Keep going. Keep moving forward. Fight. And I think of people who give up every year, as I'm talking about in this series, every year there are people who quit fighting. And they quit that a long time ago because they became weak and weaker, and that's what happens. It's a process. And it's going to happen. It's mind-boggling to me, but I know with all my being, it's going to happen all the way up to Christ's return. People who quit fighting the fight. So if anyone comes to me and does not, the word means love less. It's a comparison being made. Love less their father and mother, wife, husband, children, brothers and sisters, yes, and their own life also. They cannot be my disciple. That's incredible to understand. That's what God requires, that we have that kind of conviction. God is first. God's way of life is first. God's way of life is the only way that produces true peace and has real meaning to it. Man's is all selfish. We have 6,000 years of selfishness, of wars and fighting and killing and drama on the earth, pain, hurt, and suffering. Horrible. And so sometimes people like to gloss over that and like it's better. So we go through a better time, like right now things are, we have, look at the wealth of this nation. And so people want to push that back as though it's not really there in front of them. It's right in front of us. And we think we can be ourselves here and push the others away. That's why Europe doesn't trust us too much anymore. They're getting less trustworthy in the sense of toward us. Are we someone they can really rely upon if Russia keeps moving forward like they are? Are we really going to be there to back them up when it gets really, really nasty? That's why they do. That's why prophetically God's already told us what they're going to do. That's why they make the turn that they do. Because they try to survive and they don't want to have a nuclear war on their continent. I'm amazed how much God has shown us of what's coming and how close we are to it now and how much we can see it in the news now. Things that are taking place, they're not pleasant things to look at. They're horrifying. But that's where we are in time. There have been wars after war after war, world war, and another world war. And it's only by God's grace and God's purpose and plan and His timing that we've gone as long as we have without another world war. This one is going to be horrific. That's why God prophesied such things to happen as in the book of Revelation and elsewhere of the magnitude of that's going to take place. It's a horrifying thing to think about. So should we not talk about it or think about it? No, we need to be alert to the time we live in, to use the time we have to draw closer to God because He's the one who saves us. Because we're going to go through a time that nothing else can, nothing else you do can save you. So our life is in God's hands. Life or death is in God's hands. You can't give that to anyone. It's here or it's not. So it says here, and their own life also, love less by comparison. God Almighty, God has to be first. Even our own life has to be above that. That's a lot said there. It really is. And it takes God's help to even digest that, what it's saying, and to embrace it and realize, yeah, that's true. God has to be first. What He tells us should be first. He's the one that's bringing all this to a head. He's the one that gave mankind 6,000 years to live His own governments, His own ways. And He says the next 1,000 belong to Him, to Joshua, as he returns to become. I'm amazed that people can read through those things in Scripture, and every once in a while you hear something on TV and some preachers talked about it, or he gets a little bit of space. I can't take too much of it, but don't grasp what's before us. Incredible. And Christ is going to reign, 144,000 with Him. Awesome. We're so close to that having to take place. Otherwise, God says mankind would destroy himself. That's where we are with nuclear weapons. They're going to be used. It's just a matter of God's timing. And whoever does not, well, it goes on to say, I'll read it again. If anyone comes to me and does not love less their father and mother, wife and husband, as it is, and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and their own life also, they cannot be my disciple. We have to make our own choices. We have to have our own commitment. God is first, regardless of what happens. If your life's in God's hands, where else would you want it? And whoever does not bear their, it's not cross, pole, if you will, because that's what it's about. It's about what He was killed on. And come after me cannot be my disciple. Pretty strong, but it can't be any other way. Awesome. For which of you intending to build a tower, it's about a fortified structure, does not sit down first and count the cost, whether they have to finish it? So in any kind of construction, obviously, you don't want to be made a fool of. Start building a house, whatever it might be, whatever you're building, you want to make sure you can finish it. And that you've planned properly and you made the proper plans for it. And this is what God is saying about us. Count the cost. We've been told these things from the very beginning. Unless after they have laid the foundation and are not able to finish it. So, look at how many people have gone by the wayside. Look at what the apostasy produced and what choices people made from that point forward. It's scary. It really is. Are not able to finish it. All who see it begin to mock him, saying, this person began to build and was not able to finish. Using a parable in a carnal world to help us to grasp some things on a spiritual plane. Or what king going to make war against another king does not sit down first and consider whether he is able to finish it with 10,000? In other words, rely on self and to meet him who comes against him with 20,000. Or else, while the other is still a great way off, he sends a delegation to ask conditions of peace. Addresses whether or not one needs to or is ready to give up reliance on self. It's what it's about. And seek to live a way that offers true peace. So, incredible some of the things that God gives to us to understand how we're supposed to live. And we live in a time that's hard. This isn't a nice time. But you know what? The last 6,000 years, there have been a lot of nasty times on earth where wars and people have lived the way they have and taken advantage of one another. And only in the last 100 years or so have we seen a lot of changes taking place because of promises God gave to Manasseh and to Ephraim, and the world beginning to make some changes in some of those areas for certain people, but not for all people. And on a very selfish plane, but certain things had to be fulfilled first. Going on to verse 33. So likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that they have not, or that they have, cannot be my disciple. So we all have to come to that point in time where we come to realize there is that which we're of self, of our way of seeing things and doing things, that we're ready to give up because we see it leads to nothing, and choose what means everything. And each one of us has to make that choice in our own decision. Salt is good, but if the salt has lost its flavor, how will it season? So I've known a lot of people through time in the church who've had salt seem to a time, and then after a while, none whatsoever. It's a horrible thing to see. It's a horrible thing to witness. It's a horrible thing to see the kind of choices and decisions, and then what happens in their lives afterwards. Verse 35. It is neither fit for the land nor for the dunghill, that men throw it out. Whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. So it comes down to whether God is placed first in our life. And each person has to make that choice themselves. No one else can make it for them. And so how we live that's up to each one of us. And if God isn't first, then people can't persevere. They can't live up to the name of Israel, truly. Israel, the Israel of God, the spiritual family of God, the one He's molding and fashioning and preparing, and has been for nearly 6,000 years now. Incredible. Luke 14, verse 16. Let's go back up toward the front of this chapter now. Luke 14, verse 28. For which of you intending to build a tower, a fortified structure, does not sit down first and count the cost, whether they have to finish it? Unless after they have laid the foundation are not able to finish it, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this person began to build and was not able to finish. I think what a horrible thing to happen on the spiritual plane. All the people, the majority, in the past 2,000 years, we can only make our own decisions and then fight for it, each one of us, and we're held accountable for the choices we each make. And it's a battle, it's a fight, it truly is. And on a spiritual plane, because we realize we can't do it by ourselves, we have to rely on God, we have to cry out to God for the help and the strength to do it, because it's a spiritual matter, spiritual, in the mind and how we think. And so He gives us that ability as we cry out for it, that help day by day. Or what king going to make war against another king does not sit down first and consider whether he's able to finish it with 10,000? Relying on self, I think of different things that come up, to meet him who comes to him with 20,000. Or else, when the other is still a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks conditions of peace. Addresses whether or not one needs to or ready to give up reliance on self and seek to live a way that offers true peace. That's what we come up against. We come up to that point in time when God calls us and gives us the truth, and we have to make choices all along the way, over and over again. So likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that they have, cannot be my disciple. So we look at life and we realize all that we have comes from God. And if we look to God and our minds are on God, He works with us. He molds and fashions. He gives us what we need as we need it. Sometimes we may feel that we're not at that point and we have to examine certain things in our own life, and sometimes they lead us to change and to repentance and drawing closer to God. And as we do that process, God gives us more and more, especially that which is a matter of truth, which is what is important in life. It's how we live and how we think. Salt is good, but if the salt has lost its flavor, how will it season? And so that's the same with us. This is something we need in our life. Not something that has to come from God. It has to be stirred up by God's power. It is neither fit for the land nor the dunghill, and men throw it out. Whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. So again, it's a matter, is God first in our life? And we're tried by this throughout our lives. Is God first? If not, one can't persevere. Did I jump back up to the previous verses? I did. Well, it doesn't hurt to go back to it and hear something a little different, because I said something different there, or added to it. I'm sorry, Luke 16, verse 24, 14, verse 16, right? Is that where I'm at? Please help me. You are taking notes. I'm not. And I have my finger here, and I think, the wrong spot. All right. 16, verse 16. Whew. Then he, Joshua, said to him, a certain man gave a great supper and invited, or called many as it is, and sent his servant at supper time to say to those who were invited, come, for all things are now ready. But they all, as it says here, as one, began to make excuses. The first said to him, I have bought a piece of ground, and I must go and see it. I ask you to have me excused. Then another said, I bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I'm going to prove or try or test or examine them, how well they're able to do, in other words. I ask you to have me excused. So it's going through this scenario here of different physical things that take place in human life to teach us something on a spiritual plane about a calling that we have. Still another said, I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come. In other words, I have other priorities, things that interfere with choices that people make in life. So that servant came and reported these things to his master. Then the master of the house, being angry, said to the servant, go out quickly into the streets and lanes of the city, and bring in here the poor, the maimed, the lame, and the blind. Human pride is a horrible thing. It really is. It's so ugly. And that, more than anything else, is what prevents people from being able to be worked with by God when it's all said and done. The human mind that can conjure up things of thinking that make choices that turn away from God, that put other importance on other things rather than God and what God reveals is true. And it's a common thing we've seen in God's church, at least through Philadelphia, Laodicea, and even now. And the servant said, Master, it is done as you commanded, and still there is room. Incredible to think about the process. They're going to be 144,000. And it's working according to the way in God's timing. And he hasn't revealed everything about all that, but that's exactly the number that's going to be there. Not one more, not one less. Amazing. To me, this is an amazing thing. 144,000 over 6,000 years of people who've been chosen for a purpose of something they're going to do. Awesome. Then the master said to the servant, go out into the highways and hedges and compel them to come in, that my house may be filled. That's happening more in the end time here now, especially, than any other point in time. Because of what's taken place, because of what took place with the apostasy, because of what God allowed to take place during Laodicea, to teach some of the most incredible lessons that human beings need to learn. I hope we understand that. The Laodicea, people who had God's Spirit, what can happen to the thousands and tens of thousands, even with God's Spirit, when it's not treasured, when it's not used as it's supposed to be in their lives, become lifted up with pride and haughtiness, self-reliance, become lukewarm. Incredible. And so it says, go out and compel them that my house may be filled. For I say to you that none of those men who were invited, called, that's what the word is here, will taste my supper. I think of this different times, and I think about what it's saying here, and I think, what an incredible thing that God had to tell us that in the church, they're going to be the majority who do not embrace Him, who do not seek to change, who do not seek to conquer and overcome. The majority of all those who are called over primarily the last 2,000 years, but because God had a different way of working with different ones on an individual basis as a whole, and had a purpose as He worked with them and called them, knew their minds, knew their heart, knew everything that was inside them in that respect, and then began to work with an organized body, the church, after Joshua and after the day of Pentecost. From that point on, when the church was organized and all the things that took place with the disciples, and then later on Paul, as he went in different parts of the world preaching this way of life, and then how it grew through different centuries, but still not large numbers, but a certain number that was being worked with. Far more of them called and having that opportunity than those who ended up being chosen. Awesome to understand that far more went by the wayside than those who accomplished what needed to be accomplished in their life, to give the number of 144,000, because the majority have been called in the last 2,000 years. Not that many in the first 4,000 years. It's been in the last 2,000 years that the vast majority of all who are going to be a part of God's government when Christ returns will be with Him when He returns. Resurrected. Incredible. Some of the things that are in Scripture that people are blind to and don't understand in the book of Revelation. Awesome, what we've been given. For I say to you that none of those who were invited or called will taste my supper. I think I skipped something here. Does anybody know what verse I ended on here? Because I think I slipped my... What's that? That was it? Okay, good. Because I thought I dropped my finger down here too far. Okay, again, God has to be placed first in our lives. It's always boiled down to that. Our choices, our decisions, and no one else can do that except each one of us individually. Is God first? If He is, yeah, we're going to respond in a different way. But I think of all the people who have been called through time, because there are far more who haven't accomplished what they were called to accomplish. Many are called, few have been chosen. Awesome. You have to fight for it with all your being, you truly do, and that's what this is about, fighting for it with all your being. Never giving up, persevering to the end. That's what the title of the sermon is. You have to persevere to the end. It's a battle, it truly is.